Welcome, everyone. My name is Neil Barman, and I'm a registered architect in British Columbia and a product specialist with Vectorworks Canada. Today, my colleague Luc Lefebvre will be presenting coordinating drawings with consultants using IFC. We will be available during the presentation via the chat to answer questions. If you are a member of a professional association, you may be able to submit this session as a self-reported learning unit. Please refer to your jurisdiction's continuing education guidelines. And with that, I would like to introduce Luc. Luc is a registered architect in Quebec and comes with more than 20 successful years in the business. Before joining Vectorworks, he served as a project manager and a BIM manager at King & King Architects in Syracuse, New York, where he designed educational facilities. As BIM manager, he was responsible for the implementation and coordination of BIM projects. For the last 4 years at Vectorworks, Luc has used his knowledge of Vectorworks and his professional practice experience to help other firms transition to a BIM process. His role as the product marketing manager for architecture entails bridging market demand with the engineering team, supporting sales and customer success, and cultivating relationships with Vectorworks users. Over to you, Luc.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you. And we're just going to go through the presentation. We're going to start right away. So let's get started.
Today's learning objectives are review the workflow and file exchange process using IFC models and other useful file formats. Review how to set up your BIM model for importing IFC models, and learn how to use model information to coordinate and create more accurate drawings. The presentation will be divided in 5 different areas. We're going to talk about benefits, and then the various file formats, types of referencing, and how to prepare specifically your architectural model to receive your consultant's model. And then we will look at various examples on how you can use the models for drawing creations. In the life cycle of a building information model is in the center as a single source of truth from the start of a project through construction and facility management. 10 benefits of building information modeling illustrate the various types of information that can be used for this process. It can be used during the design process for analysis, documentations, shop drawings, and fabrication in the construction administration phase. 4D and 5D are the construction scheduling and cost estimating. And lastly, building operation and assets management on the owner side all rely on the information model. Today, we are focusing on the design side of the cycle. Using an open format such IFC, the collaboration process becomes easier. IFC stands for International Foundation Class, a non-proprietary format developed by building Smart International. During the design, one of the benefits that building information model provide is the ability to coordinate all disciplines 3D model. Using other software to analyze the model and provide the contractors a fully coordinated set of documents, which in return saves money to the owner with potentially a lot less change orders and a more accurate bid. With OpenBIM, we use a federated model workflow to bring each 3D models together. During the design process, there is also a direct exchange process happening between the consultants. For example, when starting a BIM project, the architect will be the first to set the model. Then the structural engineer will come second. Mechanical engineers will most likely, or in most cases, be the last to add their information to the model. The workflow to exchange files between the design team has been the same ever since CAD. Back in the 80s, I remember the days when we were exchanging DXF formats. In the BIM process, the file exchange remains similar, but the type of files evolved. The idea between exchanging the files have not changed. It provides a better coordinated set of documents. You may ask, what are the formats used in the BIM process? This presentation focuses on the IFC file format, but PDF and DWGs are still part of the file exchange process. In my experience, we always exchange all three file formats, and they get used in different ways. The 3D will provide the geometry needed to locate the building on the site, and it also provides the data for each building elements included in the model. DWG can be used to overlay in 2D the more specific graphic related issues. As you know, BIM doesn't remove the 2D documentation from the deliverables. 2D documentations remain the contractual documents between the owner and the architect, and between the contractors and the owner. Before getting into the actual file setup and process of exchanging file, let's discuss what is involved in the planning of a BIM process. The key is to plan the process well. Discuss with the design team what are the goals for exchanging the models. In many cases, these requirements are established by the owner, so it is important to clarify how the owner wants to use the model. Establish a clear schedule of file exchange along with file exchange protocols and naming standards. How are you going to use the models? For clash detections, asset management, construction scheduling, estimating, any of these will affect the type of information needed to be included along with the geometry of the building elements. This planning process will result in the creation of a BIM execution plan. What you see here is an example. In addition to the goals and schedule, here you will establish all model convention, such as unit, project origin, naming standards, and model ownership. What level of details is needed at each phases of the design, etc. As part of the design phases, clash detection is one of the process that you will perform. This process uses other specialized tools or software such as Solibri Model Checker or Navisworks. It is important to mention that we support the BIM collaboration format directly in Vectorworks. This file format utilizes the clash detection report and bring issues created in a clash process directly in the application, where you can zoom in the area of concerns to review what change is required and who is responsible for that change. This process is very useful in communicating and keeping everyone accountable for the quality of the work. This is an example of a clash detection issue created in Solibri. When creating a BCF file, you can open it directly in our interface using the BCF Manager tool in the Tool drop-down menu. And here you can see it in Vectorworks. When selecting an issue from the clash report, you will automatically zoom in the area of concern, make the appropriate change, and edit the topic, add comments, or close the issue when changes are made. But when using this process, IFC files must be present in the architectural model. Since these processes involve the exchange of file in an IFC format, we are interested in how you can be more efficient in using those IFC files by creating drawings and coordinating your models, for example. Let's talk about the IFC export process and some basic setup you need to be aware of to get a better and smoother result on the other end with your consultant. The first thing that you will need to verify is, or have a discussion with your consultants when setting up a BIM project, is the origin, the location of the project origin. Typically, the architectural model is used to set the project origin. In Vectorworks, by default, the origin is 0, 0, 0, but there are ways to verify that by changing some of the preferences of the file. Here you can see the mark is at 0, 0, and there are ways to turn on and off those markers. Just one thing that is important to know before a BIM project starts is that you need to provide a BIM execution plan, and the origin should be mentioned there. Typically on a project, you will set a corner of the building or a construction point to determine what that origin is. The second part to preparing your model for an IFC exchange is to ensure that all objects have an IFC designation. So you can see here on the screen, I selected a window object, and you have, you can verify in the object info palette, in the data pane of the object info palette, how that object, or what IFC designation that object has. So I selected a wall here, and then you can see in the data pane that the default IFC designation for that wall is a wall standard. This example here are extrusions, and when I select this extrusion, now I can verify in the data pane that no IFC designation was assigned. So if you do an export without assigning the IFC information to this, these objects will not export and will not be visible by your consultants. So through the data pane, when I create a selection of objects, I can directly attach an IFC designation for those objects. And I can enter the information that is relevant for the process. Typically, the information of all of the objects are going to be indicated in a BIM execution plan. In Vectorworks, all of the plugin objects like walls, doors, and windows have default sets of IFC designation attached to them. But other types of objects like a symbol definition or an extrusion won't have automatically that that information attached to the object. So a few versions ago, we added what we call the IFC data mapping tool, which helps you streamlining this process of assigning the IFC information. So here I'm typing the wall tool, for example. And if you look at the wall, you have, as I mentioned earlier, a set of, or a preset of IFC data attached to the object. Here, what you can do, that mapping will allow you to change that default mapping. Now, you do not need to do any of that. Using the standard mapping is acceptable, especially if you are looking to use the model for clash detection. Now, here I am typing, and what I want to do is I want to add automatically a mapping to the symbol, that the bollard symbol that was selected on the screen. So I can type the name of the symbol, and then I go in the middle and I can add. So I found the symbol here, and then I can add the mapping. So I click change mapping, and I can assign a specific type of IFC designation to this. So in this case, it's an IFC furniture type or furnishing. And then through this process, I can expand this IFC data set, and then I can actually define a specific mapping. So here I'm clicking here, and I can essentially select a set of criteria and formula that will actually assign the data, the proper data to that field. So now if I go back in the interface, you can see that the object that was already selected now has an IFC designation visible and verifiable on the screen. So before, another tip that I can give you before exporting your IFC file is that you should, using save views will help you streamlining this, but you should have only visible objects, so that when you export, it exports only the information and geometry necessary for the coordination process. The second tip that I can give you is that if you do an export in a 3D view, it will take a lot longer. So we recommend that you switch to a top plan view and then you zoom into a corner of the building. And the last part is to ensure that the 3D conversion resolution is set to low in your document preferences. And this will help accelerating the export time for your file. So in summary, in the export process, there are a few very critical things that you need to remember. You need to all agree with your consultant where the origin of the project is, and it should be indicated in a BIM execution plan. Verify that all of the objects that you want to transfer to your consultants have an IFC designation. And in the file setup, you must make sure that the 3D resolution is at low, and that you set up your view to a top plan view prior to the export. So now let's take a look at the export itself. So when you select from the file menu, export IFC, you have several or a lot of information that you need to actually enter here in these windows. The first tab that you saw on the screen here is that is the file format and the IFC version. So the standard IFC version would be a 2x3. We recently at Vectorworks got the certification for IFC 4. And then the other information that you are required to enter is project data related and author data related. And this is the type of information that will remain with the file. So you're going to enter this once, but it is important and critical because it assigns the who the author is. So it allows maintaining you, the architect, the ownership of that model. On the second tab, you have the layer mapping tab, which allows you to essentially take your design layers and map the design layers correctly into the stories of the model. Now in Vectorworks, we have a way to automate the mapping when you're using in your template the story setup. If you're using the stories, then you do not need to do the mapping because the mapping will be done automatically for you. This is critical because when you get into a clash detection software, for example, or any other tools that you can use in the process, the BIM projects are typically set by stories. So whether you're using stories or not in your Vectorworks files, you must enter those stories and map those layers to the correct stories in IFC. Now we'll take a look at the import process. I like to use, or we like to call this concept of shuttle file And that's really important because when you import your Vectorworks files, you probably don't want to bring that directly in your architectural model. So what we typically do is use an empty template and then import the IFC project into that empty file. You can see here on the screen that when selecting the import option, the import IFC option, there are two different ways to see the information. But what you can see on the screen here, this example is a structural model. Each of the stories that are set up in the Revit file, in this case was a Revit file, comes in Vectorworks, and they will be transferred as a design layer. And within these within each of these stories, you can actually filter the type of objects that you want to bring into the model. So in this case, I'm just bringing everything here. The other way to filter the information that is brought into the Vectorworks file is simply by types of elements. So you can say, I want to bring all of my structural model except the beams or except the floors, and then your model will be displayed the way you want to have it displayed. So here you can see the actual structural model that is imported, and here we're looking at the design layers, and as I mentioned earlier, you can see that the design layers are the names of the stories that were set up in the consultant's file. Vectorworks, during the process also, Vectorworks will create classes that relates to the types of building element. So you're going to have one class for beams, one class for columns, column grids, foundation, etc. We're repeating the process for the mechanical model. So we're importing the file into an empty template file. And here you can see a little bit of the difference between the two models. So I have two different consultants. They both set up their file separately. And in this case, you can see like the design layer name, level 1, level 2. It's a lot simpler than the structural model. And so based on this, you can see that it's really critical that it's communicated in a BIM execution plan how the story naming and all of the naming standards that needs to go into the setup of the file of a BIM project. So in this case, it's not too difficult, level 1, level 2, but in more complex projects, it could become an issue where you have a lot of different types of naming, and it could get confusing. So now you can see also the classes and what was created for that. So you have a group for electrical, a group for mechanical, a group for plumbing. And here you can see that from those files, from those IFC shuttle file that I created, now I can reference those files into my architectural model. And this is the example of that federated model that I created in Vectorworks. And you have 3 different models with all of the disciplines showing in here. So in Vectorworks, I use the layer import reference style. In Vectorworks, you can do 2 different types of referencing. You have the design layer viewport referencing, and you have the layer import referencing. The layer import, in this case, because I want to use my models to generate drawings and be able to visualize these building elements into building sections and plans, I'm using the layer import method here in this case. The design layer viewport could be used if, for example, you just want to visualize the objects and do like a model verification or validation. But since I want to use this model, then I'm using the layer import. So let's take a look here on at how we can also use the DWG file from our consultant to coordinate all of our drawings. Here, what I'm doing with this file is I'm setting up and preparing my shuttle file for the mechanical model file. I'm preparing the file here by adding a design layer to receive the DWG file. And so it will allow me to look at the DWG file and the DWG model and make sure, first of all, that things are coordinated with my consultant, but also I can use that information. So I'm overlaying the DWG on top of the model. And I can use that information in various situations. On the flip side, if your consultants are receiving, for example, your reflected ceiling plan in a DWG format, they also can overlay that 2D drawing into their Revit model, for example, and it allows them to actually be more accurate in how they can position, their air return or their light fixture into a grid. So here I'm finding the DWG from the consultant, and in Vectorworks you can also, and I recommend that highly, that you're creating a reference DWG as opposed to a direct import of the file. So this is really important because it allows you to simply update the DWG through the reference tab of Vectorworks. And when your consultant is sending a new DWG file, then you simply just update the reference. So here you can see the overlay. I'm using the visibility tool here to just simply filter the DWG information, and so I can just see what is relevant for my work. So here I have the ductwork with the air return and supply, and I can overlay that into the model and verify that things are in place correctly. When preparing the model to receive the IFC file, here you can see that I have in the organization palette the first image simply has a placeholder for the structural and a mechanical model. And as I create the referencing of my shuttle files, then I can add, and you can see on the last one, you can see all of my structural layers and my mechanical layers, and I can actually group them correctly under that banner that I preset in my template. So that way I can position all of the layers where I need them. And because we also have in a design layer the organization of stories, if you have specific layers that are related to stories, then you can also position those layers and move them in the hierarchical position of those layers into the stories within your architectural model. So here we're going to talk about how you can actually put those models to work and how you can use them in Vectorworks to generate your 2D documentation. So I have the model here, and one of the advantage of creating this federated model is, first of all, the visualization of the models. So we often talk about clash detection and sending our files and using a different software. But by bringing those IFC models directly in Vectorworks, it allows you to pre-visualize that, or to actually look at the objects and say, hey, I'm going to call my consultant and I'm going to tell them that they have a conflict between the ductwork and the structural. So you can almost do a coordination meeting with them and say, please change those elements. Here in Vectorworks, I'm using the clip cube feature, and I'm using an OpenGL rendering, and with the clip cube, it allows me to move into the building and zoom into the different elements. So here I have this room, and you can actually see that the plumbing pipe is in conflict with the orange ductwork that you can see there. So that's a concrete example on how you can call your consultants and tell them that they need to coordinate their work before sending the last model. A different way to use those models, if I look at a sheet like a reflected ceiling plan, for example, and I can see here the architectural grid that I created in the file, and zooming in here, I can see the 3D objects of the ductwork that is from the mechanical model. So looking at all of that and having the structural model as well, now what I can do is I can just make those layers visible in my viewport just by editing the viewport layer visibility here. And you can see that now I can visualize if there are any conflicts in plan with the ductwork and the structural beams and the light fixtures, etc. So it's a big advantage of being able to just overlay all of that information. Lastly, in this example, on the first floor, this is a bus garage, and it has a snow melt system. So there's a lot of piping that's in the concrete slab, and I want to ensure that all of that piping is coordinated and there's no conflict. So I can zoom into that area here, and you can see all of the zones for that heating radiant heat system that's in the floor slab. So a huge advantage is the ability to visualize the problematic areas directly in the architectural model, as I showed you, eliminate the duplication of work in a more 2D workflow. There were a lot of duplication of work. Now models can be used and shared to show within the file to create the drawings, ceiling plans, floor plans, and sections. And here is the section example where I can navigate through, see the structural model, interact with the architectural model, and I can use this information to print the drawings directly in my model. So again, I don't have, as an architect, to draw all of these beams and those joists and columns and things like that, because they exist in the file now. So with using the IFC reference files, you can streamline the process of coordination and provide your client a more accurate set of documentation.
That was great. Thank you, Luke. Now, we do have some questions that have come in. I can start going through those with you.
All right.
Here's one. Would the consultant save their IFC as a whole or provide separate IFCs, such as mechanical piping separated from ducting, etc.?
Okay, so I guess this depends. It depends. It can be done as separate files. This would have to be determined essentially in the BIM execution plan that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So I would say that most time in my experience, MEP exports their IFC model as one model, but you may have some situation where those trades are not necessarily from the same office or things like that. So yeah, it's just better to plan that ahead of time.
Okay. Here's another. We are already using Vectorworks for 3D and BIM. What are the ways that we can check the IFC information attached to any particular object?
Okay, what are the ways that you can check? So with Vectorworks, you have, I can think of maybe 3 different ways that you can do that. First, most building elements in Vectorworks are already mapped to an IFC data. So when you think about plugin objects, it's very similar to other platforms as well. Plugin objects like walls, slabs, doors, windows, those types of intelligent object has what we called the default IFC mapping. So with this default IFC mapping, you don't really have to do a whole lot of things with the model for it to export. The data mapping also can be customized using the data manager. So it's a tool that we have that allows you to customize and map any type of data or data records, whether it's a custom record or things like that. All of that, those data sets can actually be mapped to any type of objects that you have in Vectorworks. So the second part to this is that as far as verification of the data and quality assurance of providing like a good model is really, we have a tool that's called data visualization in Vectorworks. So what data visualization does is that you can create a set of criteria that allows you, based on a specified set of data. So if you say, I want to see all of my IFC objects or walls or things like that, then you can set that criteria with a specific color, and then essentially, like, you know, the colors, like the walls are painted with a color that indicates if the data was correctly assigned into the object. So this is the second way that you can actually do the verification part of things. And then the last part that I wanted to bring up is talking about the worksheets, the worksheet workflow that we can implement, that you can implement with Vectorworks, is that essentially IFC data can be extracted through the worksheet, and you can actually create lists of all objects containing IFC data. And so that essentially just gives you kind of like the full picture of the objects. And with the worksheet in Vectorworks also, the advantage is that it's a two-way scheduling, so that, you know, if you want to edit something in the worksheet, you can send that information to your object or vice versa. So there's really a lot of good tools that you can use and implement in your workflow in order to do the verification part of that.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, those are all great aspects that we've got. Here's another question. I received an IFC from a Revit model. I'd like to do area takeoffs in Vectorworks of the amount of glass and solid wall. Is there any formatting that I can ask for to help me with this?
Okay, so maybe it's just clarifying a few things, but when you're importing the IFC file in Vectorworks, every entity is tagged as an IFC entity, and so the IFC functionality, or I'm not sure how to explain that, but the IFC data includes not only the geometry and the actual representation of the geometry that you see on the screen, but also it has what we call the metadata. And then that metadata, including the geometry, meaning the height, the width, the volume, things like that, can be extracted. And I just talked about the workflow for the worksheets in Vectorworks. And the worksheets will really allow you to report any type of object. So whether it's an IFC entity object or a native Vectorworks object, you can report that and make simple calculations or complex calculations as well with the worksheet. It's really kind of like, it's very similar to Excel, an Excel spreadsheet where you can actually do calculations. So if an object has a height and a width and a thickness, then you can easily calculate a volume or an area and things like that. So yes, so that would be something that you can do.
Good, good. Okay, here's an interesting one. Is there a white paper, or better yet, a checklist you can recommend that summarizes the processes you've discussed today, specifically preparing files for export and importing IFCs?
Yes, so we have a few resources that we have available for our users. So, and then we do have a portal. It's called Vectorworks University. You can go online. If you don't have an account, you can sign up for it, and then you can access those resources. So we have a specific workflow document that describes in detail how you can share your models with IFC specifically. And then we also have in the similar area of our subject, we have another one that's called Leveraging BCF for IFC-based workflow. And so I touched base a little bit on the BCF, but this is really another workflow that you can use as a reference to start getting more information about those processes.
Yeah, good point. Vectorworks University is quite handy both for this and all other aspects of learning Vectorworks.
We have many resources there, including webinars and things like that you can watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our customers find it quite handy. So here's another question. Did you say that IFC can be imported as a reference like DWG and DXF?
Yeah, I did mention that in the presentation, but I believe like last year we implemented a workflow for IFC that allows you to actually, instead of like doing a direct import of an IFC file into your Vectorworks file, you can now do a reference workflow. So that eliminates a lot of steps that you need to do to set up your file. So in the presentation, I talk about the concept of shuttle file. That's still a valid concept. Depending on the size of your project, that's something that you're going to determine ahead of time or during the process. And if it's helpful to use the shuttle file, that's still a valid workflow, because the shuttle file is referenced anyway in your Vectorworks file. But you can actually do a direct reference of the IFC directly. So, and really the benefit of that is to eliminate all of these steps that you need to set up. And it's a more direct way to get all of the updates of your consultant's IFC files quicker directly into your model.
Okay, here's another one. What are other uses for IFC outside of Vectorworks?
What other uses of IFC outside of Vectorworks? So, not sure if I'm going to answer this correctly, but so IFC can be used, maybe more kind of a general answer here, Neil, but IFC can be used in any processes related to building information modeling. So when we think about BIM, the most common process would be probably known as clash detection or collaboration process. So it's where you're exchanging your file with your consultants and you're trying to find conflicts between objects in space. But there are a lot of other processes that you can actually use the IFC model for. So for example, assets management. So if you're looking at using the BIM model throughout the entire life cycle of your project, then that's going to be really important. So you can go through construction scheduling, you can do construction estimating. All of these processes are supported with IFC, because most of the tools that are out there, and you know that there's a lot of different tools that you can use for building information modeling. Like everybody comes up with something new. We all know how technology works these days, but and that's very important. That's the reason why this file, this open format exists, is to be able to participate and to be able to, for everybody to participate in the process and have that opportunity. So yeah, there are a lot of different ways to use IFC outside our system.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, here's another question. Moving through the design process, which starts rough and then slowly develops, can IFC be added gradually?
Through the design process. So I mentioned before when I was talking about the data mapping and IFC data mapping, um, you can actually, so Vectorworks has the default that I mentioned, the default IFC mapping. And yes, so as your project evolving through the design phases, with this type of tool, it's actually fairly easy to go back and map the correct information. But the point I really want to make here is that it's really important at the beginning, and I mentioned that, I'm going to repeat that quite a lot, is to really plan that ahead. And that's really going to give you a head start on that. Not necessarily that because you need to put the data right away in your model, but at least you have an idea of what you need to do and how you can plan for that ahead of time. So the IFC default mapping with the data mapping tool is very handy, because then you can actually add that data as you're moving through the process. In Vectorworks, we also have maybe some of you or most of you are familiar with Revit and how Revit function with Revit families. In Vectorworks, we have what we call styled objects. So plugin object styles allows you to, it's similar to a family, it allows you to manage all of the information that relates to those types of objects. So with having an office and a well-organized office, you can easily manage that aspect of adding data through object styles. So if, for instance, your door change or your window changes manufacturer, or a piece of furniture is now you're specifying a different type of furniture, then you can just go into the data of that symbol and then map the correct data to it. So there's ways to manage that through the software with the tools that we have.
Very nice. Okay. Here's another one. Is there a way that IFC can be an automatic component of all objects or drawing elements?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one?
Yeah. Is there a way that IFC can be an automatic component of all objects or drawing elements? So can it be automatically added to items?
Yes. So it is for all standard objects in Vectorworks. So I mentioned styled object, walls, slabs. So anything that's a standard parametric plugin objects in Vectorworks, there is that automatic component to that. So the other thing that I would like to maybe add here is that for the custom geometry, so I mentioned about the specific tools and plugin objects. Now, when you have custom geometry, and this is one great strength of Vectorworks, we can create anything, and we have a lot of different 3D modeling tools. And with those objects, it's actually very easy to just select those objects and attach IFC data to it. I did talk about the data mapping. I don't necessarily need to repeat all of that, but I would say that the best way is to use to create symbols, especially if you have a repetitive object. So if you have like a custom design element, you create a symbol, you can attach IFC to it. But the objects are going to be transferred only if you're attaching the IFC data to it, and if you're designating that object as an IFC. I think in the presentation I did mention that about the symbols. I think I was talking about the bollard. But that's the way you would do that. But any type of object can be mapped, or you can manually attach IFC data. So there's a lot of system and makes it easy to do.
Yeah, good. Okay. When working with consultants that use Revit, do you recommend using IFC for file exchange and coordination, or just using Revit import-export tools?
So it depends. It depends on what you're looking to achieve with the model. So the IFC is the recommended file format when using the model to exchange to exchange the data sets. So data sets, the data is really the big part of that. So with the Revit format, it's more difficult to do and to participate in the collaboration process because of the data exactly. And also, we have the Revit import and export. We're using a third-party library for the Revit import-export. And so we're dependent on that technology. So our Revit export and import is not necessarily equal, right? And so our Revit import is actually pretty good. You can bring a Revit file in Vectorworks, and you're gonna, a wall will be a native wall in Vectorworks, and then you can manipulate it, and you can do, takeoffs or things like that, and you can extract information. But on the export side, that's a little bit different. The export side exports the geometry. It exports colors, shaded colors and things like that. So the geometry part is pretty good. But when it comes to the data, now it's just starting to open up, and now we're starting to be able to add the data part of it. So in the Vectorworks 2021 version that came out recently, we have some of that data. So what we call the metadata, like dimensions, yes, but it's not really made for manipulation and collaboration, because again, it's not a complete workflow that you can use throughout.
Gotcha. Okay. Here's another question. Did you mention that Vectorworks symbols do not have an IFC designation, but we can add the data, correct? And this touches on what you mentioned before.
Yes. So you can use the data mapping again, and then you can map that, or you can go to the resource manager and then you just attach that data. Yes.
Good. Okay. Here's another one about working with consultants. So some of our consultants use Revit and can therefore create IFC files, but some of our consultants still only use AutoCAD and only share DWGs of their scopes. Can I incorporate both IFC files and DWGs in Vectorworks?
Yes, of course. We actually we have a great DWG export import capabilities with Vectorworks, and it's been around for so many years that we have all of the options available here. We can go down to like a Revit 12, not a Revit, but an AutoCAD 12 version, and all the way. And we're always up to date every year. So everything should go well on that side. And you also have the same, and I think I mentioned that on the referencing. Instead of doing a direct import of a DWG, you can do a reference import, and that way your file, if there's an update, will always be updated in your file, in your Vectorworks file.
Okay. Can you clarify what is the workflow using a BCF file?
So BCF, yes, I did. I did mention that earlier, and a little bit in the presentation. So the BCF stands for BIM Collaboration Format, and I think I touched on it a little bit. But this file allows you to bring clash issues from the collaboration process. So if you're using Navisworks and do a clash detection meeting, and then you end up with those like 300 issues, then you can take that file, which is a BCF file, and you can open that in Vectorworks directly, and then you can go through those issues, and then you can actually, there's a save view with that. So when you click on that, the software moves around, and then it shows you where it is. In order to do that, you need to have the IFC files in Vectorworks. Then you can open your BCF file, and then you can navigate through that. And in Vectorworks, that interface also allows you to resolve the issue, close the issue, and then resave the BCF and send it out to your consultant. So that's the way you're going to be closing the loop with the communication between the design, the collaboration, and the communication of your project.
Very nice. And you mentioned Navisworks. Solibri is another application that would work for that as well?
There are several BIM or clash detection software out there. So yes, Solibri is one of them. Singular, depending of where you are. Also, we're covering quite a big territory around the world. So, but yes, Solibri is one of them.
Good. Okay. Yeah, here's a good one too. Does Vectorworks work with Kobe?
Yes. So Kobe is the construction. So the Kobe, if you're not familiar, is Construction Operation Building Information Exchange, and this is an international standard relating to the management of the asset information, including the spaces and equipments in your project. And that Kobe is exchanged via worksheets or also via a model view with IFC in IFC Export.
Okay.
Great. Are we?
No. We just have, it looks like a couple more. This is an interesting one. Let's try on this one here. Should each IFC designation be tied to a specification?
I think we are kind of running out of time here, Neil. I'm not sure if maybe we can save this maybe for a Q&A through email or something. And
For sure.
And certainly, like if we haven't answered all of your questions, and if we missed any of the questions, we will definitely be coming back to you and getting back to you by email. So
Yes.
it was a pleasure to be here with you, Neil, and everybody. I hope it was great information.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you so much, Luke. It's definitely excellent information to have as people are evolving into more of a BIM process for their workflows. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.